Hello and welcome back in, everyone, to another episode of the College Sports Side. That's Leaf. I'm Scott, and we are here with you on this Tuesday to unpack what a weekend it was over the weekend with the start of the 2021 March Madness tournament, the NCAA tournament. Boy, it was insane. A lot of crazy things happened, a lot of big upsets, things shifting here and there. A lot of good storylines to get to. It was 4 days straight of pretty much, at least here, 10 a.m. to about 10 p.m., 11 p.m. of straight of basketball. I know we digested a lot of it. So first off, I'm just going to shoot it to you and open up your your opening statements of your thoughts that you had from the weekend.
I was so happy to have Madness back. Like first and foremost, that I said it kind of jokingly. I was like, that was the best day of the year, and it really was. Like I went out, camped out, watched some basketball, saw some friends, and just missed the event that is March Madness. Like to me, that's the greatest sporting event in the world. Like it's just the beauty of it showed this year because there's so many upsets. There out of 16 seeds, 15 seeds got a win. And for those of you who don't know what that means, there's four of each seed, and therefore one of each, at least one of each of the seeds, except for the 16 won, which is pretty miraculous. And the basketball is really good. I mean, there was very few blowouts. I mean, you see a few like 116s. You saw a few games where in the second round where a few of the upset teams got outclassed, but a lot of the games were excellent. And my biggest takeaway was that college basketball as a landscape is very competitive. There's very few differences between a team like Loyola Chicago and a team like Illinois that we both agree was worthy of a one seed. And you saw that, and that's what makes basketball and March Madness in specific so fun, because one game means everything. So whoever plays better on that day has a chance. It's not a playoff series, and I just was so happy to see it back, and I can't wait for next weekend.
Yeah, it was really intriguing. There was a lot to get to. First off, my biggest thing is in the bracket that me and you picked, I somehow got two first round regions perfect, the Midwest and the West. I did really well in the Western regions, but the East, I missed two games. And then the South was a disaster. We don't want to talk about the South. But anyway, yeah, it's not a good year for brackets. A lot of upsets. So I think that's pretty much where we'll start. And we'll get to some of these. And let's start in the West region. And let's talk Ohio over Virginia. Ohio was able to bounce Virginia in the first round by 4. I was able to pick this one. Virginia came in not practicing for a while. Let's preface it with that. They were dealing with COVID issues. They had to withdraw from the ACC tournament, and they weren't able to contribute or play there. So they came into this one a little slow, a little rusty. It showed in the beginning, and then once you get that momentum with an upset brewing in the March Madness, it's so hard to shake a team that really believes that they can play with you in this sort of tournament setting. And I kind of think that's kind of what happened in this one. Ohio is a great team, but your thoughts on this one with a 13 seed Ohio beating number 4 seeded Virginia in the West?
I think you saw a team that sensed an opportunity in Ohio. They have a really excellent player in Jason Preston, and then they have good shooters around them. And what they saw was an opportunity that a team like Virginia, who is a solid team, but they weren't spectacular this year. This is a team that won't typically blow you out because they don't score a ton in terms of their pace. They're slow pace. They play good defense. But if you shoot well, if you make shots, you have a great chance against them. And then coupling that with the fact that, like you mentioned, they were on COVID pause for, I would say, 8 days straight, and they got like one shoot around before that game. And I don't want to make excuses for Virginia, and all credit to Ohio. I just think that this was opportunity they saw, and then Virginia, I think, like you said, it's hard when the momentum of another team that believes that is the underdog. It's hard to kind of quell that momentum and do well yourselves. And I think that's what you saw. You saw a little bit of rust and a little bit of nerves. And you saw guys like Sam Hauser, Trey Murphy, who shoot 45% from three, shoot very poorly in these games. And there was a stretch where Virginia scored probably 4 points in 8 minutes, and it was like a 20-6 run, I think, in mid second half. And that was, to me, the tell is that no matter how close this is, there's one team that believes and is in better frequency as a team, and the other team is just kind of battling to avoid upset rather than to win because of their situation.
Yeah, it's almost like they have this expectation where, oh my God, we really need to win this game because we can't get upset by the 13th seeded Ohio Bobcats. But then again, you have it flipped on the other side of Ohio's playing for their lives as well, and they think they have every right to be in this tournament as well, and they did, and they showed that and came out and played a very great game against a very good Virginia team. So that was one of the biggest upsets in the West region. Ohio then went on and lost yesterday to Creighton. Creighton had a very good performance in that game. They looked unstoppable. They hit threes. They were pushing the pace up and down the floor, holding Ohio to just 58 points. But Creighton was lucky to get out of their first round game against UC Santa Barbara, the 12 seed. That shot for UC Santa Barbara was pretty much down to maybe win the game, but it rimmed out, and in heartbreak fashion, UC Santa Barbara was not able to pull that one out, and Creighton got the win 63-62. Your thoughts on that game that was really close to another 12-5 upset, and then also Creighton as they move on now to the Sweet 16?
I'll start with my thoughts on that game, and my thoughts were that I thought if UC Santa Barbara could have shot the ball any better, and like I stopped watching for a bit and I switched games, and I was like, wow, if they can't make a shot, Creighton's going to take the lead. So then Creighton takes a 10-point lead, and UC Santa Barbara is creating beautiful shots for themselves. They just could not shoot. They couldn't hit a broadside of the barn for much of the night, and had a great chance. And then you see 33 seconds are left in the game. You give up an offensive rebound and have a 57% shooter in Christian Bishop hit 2 free throws on a 1-and-1, and then get a point blank look for Amadou Sow. You really played a great game. You got everything you looked for, and then the last minutes were sad. The one thing I noticed is Amadou Sow the entire night kept dropping the ball and was getting stripped by smaller guards because he's a huge man. And I think he tried to draw a foul and like load up slowly. I feel like he could have gone straight up and finished that, and I'm sure he's kicking himself there. I just felt badly for the Gauchos because they played very well. They defended a very explosive Creighton team to limit their shooting. But if they then Santa Barbara just could not shoot in that game. So that was an interesting one. And as for Creighton and how I see them doing, they played a nice game against Ohio. That was a really impressive game, in fact. But that their next opponent is unlike anything they've seen all year, and that is Gonzaga. And I have tempered expectations for Creighton. I think they're going to have to shoot out of their mind to keep it close. I don't think they're going to win, obviously, but if they shoot extremely well, there's a chance.
Yeah, that brings me nicely to my next point that I was going to make is Gonzaga is the 1 seed in this West region. They handled Norfolk State 98-55, big win there in their opening round game, and then followed that up with a 16-point win over a really good Oklahoma team in Austin Reeves, who were able to sneak past Missouri 72-68. Gonzaga's looked amazing. They've looked dominant. That was one of my big key takeaways from the weekend as well. We can get to that in a bit here when we talk Gonzaga and Baylor. But Gonzaga Creighton is the 1-5 seeded matchup in the Sweet 16 in the West region. All right, let's get to the bottom half, though, of this West bracket, because there's been some things that have really turned my head. USC is the 6th seed, and they beat Kansas 85-51 in this game, which is just an incredible performance. The Pac-12 has been killing it in this tournament, and this is just another instance of you're going to see 2 Pac-12 schools playing the Sweet 16 out of this region with Oregon and USC, because Oregon beat a really good Iowa team by 15 and scored 95 points on that Iowa team. Gave up 80, but scored 95 and walked out of there with a 15-point win. And it wasn't even that close, in my opinion, a lot of that second half. So the 6th-seeded USC will be taking on the 7th-seeded Oregon in the Sweet 16. And talk to me about those 2 Pac-12 performances over 2 of the better schools in both the Big 12 and the Big 10.
Yeah, and so my big takeaway for the USC-Kansas game was that Evan Mobley and Isaiah Mobley were far too much to handle on the interior for Kansas. And it may have been the case anyway, but like Virginia, I think Kansas, you saw them struggle a little bit with Eastern Washington, and their big David McCormick did not look himself in terms of stamina, and he's the only one who stood any chance. And I'm not saying he would have played toe-to-toe with Evan Mobley in specific, but that stood out to me that they were dominant inside. And then shooting, they shot well. We talk about it all year. Every time we've mentioned USC, we say, well, they got Evan Mobley, but where's their shooting? Where's their guard play going to come in? And they made shots. So that was an impressive one. It didn't stun me that they won. It stunned me how they won. And then as for Oregon and Iowa, we've talked about all year how Iowa's deficiency is defense. And the teams that are athletic and penetrate through a zone, beat them down the floor. would give them trouble. So the Oregon over Iowa win was impressive on Oregon's part because they didn't get a game beforehand. I was kind of worried how they'd come out. But my big takeaway of that is you saw superior athleticism win in both those games, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was really.
Go
ahead.
Oh yeah,
No.
and I was just going to say, and I think the Pac-12 prepares you for a lot of different styles, and there's some up and down. And whereas the Big Ten, Iowa plays fast, but they play slow, a lot of slow teams, and I think they just weren't prepared. And same with Kansas, that they weren't used to playing the Twin Tower type of deal. You don't see that too often in the Big 12. There's a lot of guards in the Big 12.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kansas was also dealing with COVID issues as well. We prefaced those two games as with the Virginia-Ohio matchup and the Kansas-Eastern Washington matchup in our prior episodes. But I just think these are two really good performances from the Pac-12 schools. I'm not saying the Pac-12 is a better conference than the Big 12 or the Big 10, but there has to be some sort of not reconciling, but almost like some sort of talk about how some of it might not even be just like that they were overrated conferences, because I don't believe that. I believe the Big 12 and the Big 10 are the best conferences in basketball, but maybe we were all kind of on the wrong track when we were talking about how like, oh, they're going to be so tested when they get to the tournament because they've played all of these games and played these teams in back-to-back weeks. Maybe they were a little worn down, honestly. And then when you get to someone who hasn't gone through that ringer and played all of those really tough games in their conference, and you get to a team like USC who has that height and and then you get to Oregon who has all that athleticism, and then you just look a little lost. And so it's a completely different scene. It's a completely different setting. I'm not saying that I view all of these games as to what determines which is the best conference or what is a better conference. I don't think that's the way it should be. But also, I think we could have definitely been wrong about our kind of the way we prefaced how tested some of these teams would be coming into it. And honestly, maybe that was behooved USC and Oregon. Some of these other matchups that we've seen, like Big Ten school, the Big Ten has been terrible in this tournament. Like they only have one seed going into the Sweet 16. The Big 12 only has one seed going into the Sweet 16. So I'm not saying that they're bad conferences, but there's definitely a story and some thoughts that both of us have wanted to share about this.
Yeah, and I want to start at a point where I think that there's something to be said for the draws. I think individual matchups are interesting in this, and I think it looks bad, especially for the Big Ten, because all year we've said the Big Ten is the best conference, and I still believe it is, because you saw the strength of schedule, the 14 top strength of schedules were all the Big Ten schools. You see 9 teams make the tournament. You see 4 top 2 seeds. And I understand 3 of those have already been eliminated, but I don't think that really speaks to the Big Ten as a conference. I think that speaks to one bad performance and maybe overachieving. In the case of Ohio State, I spoke with Mark on the takeover a while ago and said that I thought Ohio State was a pretender because they overachieved. Did I think they'd lose to Oral Roberts? No, but it just doesn't stun me that them and Iowa, for instance, aren't in the Sweet 16 because I didn't think that they had sustainable recipes for success. They're both great offensive teams that struggle defensively and get big time production out of a few players. And I kind of struggle with picking Oregon over Iowa because I thought that Luka Garza would have a dominant game, and he did, but Oregon's pace was just too much. And that's something you can't calibrate because it's like a stylistic thing of the conference. The conference itself plays slow. They play Iowa's one of the fastest teams in the conference, but they don't have the athletes that look that part. You're seeing LJ Figueroa fly in for dunks and Eugene Umarui do the same. And you just don't see that from guys in the Big Ten very often. It's a different brand of basketball. As for the one I want to kind of get off my chest and talk about how one team is overrated. Everyone was talking about how Illinois, not everyone. I don't think you think this, but I've seen this on Twitter a lot that it was like Illinois, because they're a 1 seed and they were ousted early, really encapsulates the Big Ten being overrated. I think this is a total myth. I think that Loyola Chicago, I said to my dad both times I watched the game, I said, Loyola Chicago was my most impressive team first round against Georgia Tech, and Loyola Chicago was my most impressive team second round versus Illinois. And after watching the Georgia Tech game, I was not surprised at all that Loyola Chicago won. I probably would have said that it was closer to a 50-50 than anything else because they're so unique. They play such a unique style. And Illinois is a really good team. It's just that they only play a drop coverage, and there are not too many bigs like Cameron Krutwig who catch it, and like Nikola Jokic are the point guard effectively. So that was just a really tough matchup. And I honestly think Loyola Chicago could have been a 4. They're number 8 in KenPom overall, number 1 defensively. So that wasn't as bad a loss as it is. And I think the narrative that the Big Ten's overrated because they only have one is just like small sample size. And I think it's recency bias. But it is something. I do think there's something to be said that they could be worn down because Illinois just won the Big Ten championship. They're tired. You see another team like Ohio State made it to the championship, got a few players that are banged up, Kyle Young with a concussion, and they go down early. So I think you have a valid point there. I don't believe the overrated thing. I'm not saying that you do, but I wanted to clear that cliche out because I've seen it so much on Twitter, and I engaged in a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. But I agree with you. I think if you're judging the Big Ten off of Loyola Chicago beating Illinois, you clearly didn't watch much of the Big Ten throughout the regular season. You just tuned into that upset win, and that's not necessarily what we saw in the grand scheme of the Big Ten schedule. You see Michigan is the only Big Ten team advancing to the Sweet 16, which if you would have told me that at the start of this tournament, I would have said you're crazy with how Isaiah Livers, one of their best players. But some of the things that really stood out to me is the fact that you had the depth of the Big Ten still play into at least the round of 32. You had Maryland advance and play Alabama. They did not look great in that game, but they were still able to beat a very good UConn team out of the Big East and kind of beat them by 9 and had their way with them for most of the second half. That was a surprising win for me. I was impressed by that one. One of the ones that really stood out was Wisconsin over North Carolina. Wisconsin beat North Carolina by 23 in the opening round, handing Roy Williams his first ever loss in the round of 64. That was just an incredible performance, and that was a team that we were both very down on coming into this one. So I think the depth still speaks to what the season was in the Big Ten. I just think you kind of need to change the narrative around the lines of how you judge these teams off of the top seeds losing, because Ohio State was, in a normal year, that Ohio State team would not be in a 2 seed, in my opinion. This is a year where you don't have Duke, who's good. You don't have Kentucky, who's good. This is the first time since I think 1973 or something like that where Kansas, Kentucky, Duke, or someone else, North Carolina, are not advancing to the Sweet 16. It's a weird year. And honestly, in this weird year, you needed some sort of storyline, and the team and the conferences that were playing the best basketball, the most competitive, and high paced, high reward basketball were the Big Ten and the Big 12. You can't say that any other way. Alabama was a dominant force in the SEC. The Pac-12 just does not get the same sort of coverage that the Big Ten and the Big 12 do. That's just the way that it is. They play later. People don't stay up to watch their games, and it's a real thing. And so when you have night in, night out, all the coverage surrounding the Big Ten and the Big 12, I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. They're putting together a fantastic product of basketball. We talked about it all year, But with that being said, you got teams that come into this tournament with a chip on their shoulder, and you get into a tournament scenario, and anything can happen. You saw Winthrop beat you saw North Texas beat Purdue, is what I meant to say, and some of these other situations where I was just really impressed. Oral Roberts over Ohio State, just some crazy things happen, and in a year that's been super, super unpredictable. And knowing what all of these people have to go, some of these players have to go through just to even suit up and play, with the testing, the quarantining, all of that like non-normal routine. It's harsh to judge the conferences in the way that they've been judged, especially the Big Ten. I would say, I think that some of the, like I said, the Ohio State being a 2 seed, I didn't agree with. I don't think they're that good. I think some of those are just because there truly wasn't anyone really else there to put into that scenario. Like, you don't have sort of the same landscape of what the basketball season was and what it has been in years past. And we've said it from the very get-go. Baylor and Gonzaga are different breeds. They're steps above everyone else in this tournament. And that's just kind of the way it is. You saw Wisconsin beat North Carolina by 23 and then lose by 13 to Baylor. Like, Baylor's very, very good. Gonzaga is very, very good. And we had a 2-week pause from basically saying exactly that, because you saw Gonzaga in a 2-month pause of Gonzaga beating everybody in a really hard non-conference schedule and looking amazing. And then Baylor ran through a really hard Big 12 conference until they unfortunately got COVID and kind of things messed around there. But now they're back to kind of playing the same caliber of basketball that they were earlier. And so that's kind of my take on all of that aspect of things. I think in this year you had Gonzaga, who was amazing, Baylor, who was amazing, and then everyone else was just kind of fighting for third place. And when you get into that scenario, this was the most open NCAA tournament coming into it, other than the 1 and the 2 seeds in Baylor and Gonzaga, that I think I could ever remember. And so I'm not surprised that we've seen so many upsets. But with that being said, I would have expected some of these teams, like the depth of the Big 12 and the depth of the Big 10, to have better performances than they did. But that's not to say that that's a bad conference.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And then I have a take on Baylor I want to get your point on. But first, I want to talk about the Pac-12 real quick. The Pac-12, so you see 4 teams make the Sweet 16. That's a quarter of the Sweet 16 teams, obviously. You had Colorado, who was the highest seed, is the only one who did not make it, who did make the tournament. And that's because they ran into Leonard Hamilton and Florida State. That was a really tough matchup. You're seeing USC throttled Kansas. You saw Oregon dominated Iowa. Oregon State had 2 upsets. They beat Tennessee handily and then led pretty much wire to wire against Oklahoma State, who was one of the teams that I truly thought was going to show the class of the Big 12. And show like how good the Big 12 is, having a 4 seed that could make a Sweet 16, make a Elite 8. And then you had, lastly, who am I missing?
UCLA.
Yeah, UCLA. That's an interesting one because they played a first 4. They've won 3 games. And the big thing of takeaway I'm taking from these games is that you have to believe. Like, you're seeing Oregon State, a team that had no business making the tournament unless they won the Pac-12 tournament. They win the Pac-12 tournament, and now they're hot, and they believe. They made 35 of 37 free throws against Oklahoma State. You're seeing a team that's shooting really well. They've got Jared Lucas, Kalu, just guys that are just splashing shots. They're rebounding really well with Alatishe and Silva. In Oregon, you see a team that was like, we're so much more athletic than Iowa. We can score at USC. We've got a superior athlete in Evan Mobley and even Isaiah Mobley. So what I'm seeing in this is that you've got a lot of talent in the Pac-12 that didn't come together during the season. And in this small sample size where it's one game takes all, you're seeing the talent coalesce and do very well. So I'm not ready to say the Pac-12 is the best conference like a lot of pundits have, because I like to judge that off of a full sample size of a year. And I think there are a few good teams. Like we talked about, Oregon was really good one, especially once they got Will Richardson back. They were really hot at the end of the year. So that this isn't surprising to me at all. Oregon State is surprising, but it's a one game thing. If you win, you win. If you lose, you lose, and things can happen. So that's really my takeaway. And so I got a question for you on this one. Did you think, based off some of these draws, because I think we both could have seen Oregon beating Iowa. I think we both could have seen USC beating Kansas, knowing with the COVID. I don't think we both saw UCLA advancing this far because of Texas was a big obstacle that was removed for them for their draw. And Oregon State, I didn't have this far. You had them around. Do you think that the draws are playing a big difference? And I don't want to make like an excuse, but I think that there are some conducive matchups in terms of personnel that we've seen so far in these Pac-12 wins.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting when you look at some of the teams like Oregon State. They beat Tennessee handily. They beat them by 14 points, and that's a team out of the SEC that plays great defense but has struggled all season to score. And Oregon State was able to hold them to just 56 points and scored 70. So that's a winning formula in the NCAA tournament when you play a team like that. You take that on to Oklahoma State, and Oregon State put up 80 points on them. Shot amazing from the free throw line, like you mentioned, and held Cade Cunningham and company, one of the best players in all of college basketball, to just 70 points. They beat Oklahoma State by 10, which was surprising to me. That was one of the biggest surprises so far in the tournament. So yeah, I think draws have a big impact on it. And you look at the Midwest, and let me just get to the East region, when you had Illinois as the 1 seed and Michigan as the 1 seed. They are significantly harder regions, in my opinion, than the Midwest, than the West and the South. I think there's the depth of those regions are is far superior than the depth of the West when you have Gonzaga, who's clearly the best team, and then you have Virginia, who was the 4 seed battling COVID and hadn't practiced. You had Kansas, who was the 3 seed battling COVID, and Iowa is the 2 seed who's had a couple people have high ankle sprains and they just weren't 100%. And they've been clearly compromised all year on the defensive end, and that really showed up against Oregon. And so that's a very, very vulnerable 2 seed. You look at Alabama in the East region as the 2 seed. They are really good, like really, really good. They have been all year. They played through the SEC at 16-2, and they're the conference champion. They're the regular season champion. That's very hard to do, to win your conference outright and then go into the tournament and win it there as well. And you have Michigan, who's playing here without their best player. LSU gave Michigan a run for a while and was scary just because of how potent they are offensively. And I just think the depth of the East and the Midwest region really showed up in how many of the like 10-7 upsets we saw. We saw Rutgers beat Clemson. We saw Maryland beat UConn. And some of these things that really showed up in these things. Then you saw Rutgers really push Houston. They only lost by 3 to a group.
They should have won that game.
Yeah.
They should have won that one.
And so you could have honestly seen Syracuse versus Rutgers in the Sweet 16, which would be another 10 versus 11 matchup, which is that was 3 points away and a couple missed layups from happening. And so that's definitely something that I think plays into it, is the draws of both of these teams for sure. Illinois shouldn't have had and didn't have a problem with Drexel. Loyola Chicago sitting right there at an 8 seed is just flat out scary. They're a team that's proven that they're a tournament team. They believe and get that mojo going, and they're a very, very hard out, and it proved costly for the Illini. And it almost proved costly for Michigan too, with the 8 seed in LSU. So I think the matchups between Oklahoma and Gonzaga, the 1 versus 8, and also now Baylor versus Wisconsin, which was the 9 seed, were definitely easier matchups than 1 versus 8 in Loyola Chicago and 1 versus 8 in LSU. But with that being said, I also believe Gonzaga and Baylor are much better teams than Michigan and Illinois, just personally.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And one thing I want to mention about Oklahoma is I think Oklahoma's really good, and they actually did push Gonzaga. They were missing Davion Harmon. I think that could have really helped. I'm not picking Oklahoma to win that game, but as it was, there was a push. I've got a question. I don't know if you want to transition here, but who do you have coming out of the region that is the most busted up, which is Illinois' region, which is now Loyola Chicago's region? Because actually, I'll tell my take about Baylor, because I have Baylor coming out of the top side. I still do, even bracketology aside. It's just the team that I think's played the best so far in that side. Arkansas obviously had a big win over Texas Tech. That was a fun one. But my take about Baylor is I said this on Twitter, that I think Baylor may have benefited from losing in the Big 12 tournament. They had more time to rest. They had time to evaluate, and they realized, like, you know what is this? This is just a bump in the road. Like, we've got bigger goals ahead of us. No one remembers that you don't win the Big 12 tournament if you win the national title. So what it reminded me is what I tweeted is that I think Baylor reminds me of Virginia of 2018, 2019. Baylor has 3 guards in Jared Butler, Maceo Teague, and Davion Mitchell that are phenomenal. In Virginia, they had Kyle Guy, Ty Jerome, Kihei Clark. I will say that Kihei Clark was not what he is now, but they also had DeAndre Hunter, who is an NBA draft prospect. And they were comfortable in late clock situations. They were comfortable playing defense. They were not rattled by close games. They've played a lot together, and they know how to execute, whether it's isolation, whether it's playing the system. And the other thing that's similar between these teams is that both won the ACC. Well, Virginia won the ACC, Baylor won the Big 12. Both lost in the semifinals of the conference tournament, and both were 1 seeds that were not the number 1 overall seed, but had the best record overall. Well, I guess Gonzaga has a better record, but Virginia had the best record overall in their year, and Baylor in any other year without an undefeated would be the best record overall. So I think there's some serious similarities, and I think it's going to continue the same way. And I still have Baylor winning the championship. I've been really impressed with what they do, and I just want to see that matchup we were deprived of between Baylor and Gonzaga. So that's my 2 cents. And then I think Loyola Chicago's making the Final Four. I really do. This is not just Sister Jean paraphernalia, nothing crazy. I genuinely believe that they're the best team in their region.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Loyola Chicago probably is the best team in the region, but watch out for Syracuse, man. Buddy Buckets, they have been on fire in Fuego. And Jim Boeheim in that zone is nasty in this tournament right now. And I think I texted you that I think it's the best I've seen Syracuse play that zone since they had all of those athletic freaks a few years back when they really made this deep run when they were, I think, 11 or a 12 seed and made the Final Four. With that being said, watch out for Syracuse. I think you'll see Loyola Chicago versus Syracuse in the Elite Eight to go to see who's going to take on the Final Four, which would be an awesome game to watch. Um, Houston's good, but I just don't think that they have the athletes to hang with the zone and the 3-point shooting that you need to beat a Syracuse team like that. Which I want to get to this episode a little later in the week where we'll kind of pick like each winner and then advance to the Elite Eight and what we think about that. So I'll kind of leave that there for now. But in terms of Baylor, I agree with you. I really think I also think that Baylor's so I said earlier on in this episode that we need to start kind of changing the narrative maybe from hard regular season matchups for 2 months straight and not necessarily being tested in the way that Gonzaga has been throughout the course of the WCC regular season. But Baylor's been tested time and time again, but they also were beating teams by a lot of a significant margin throughout that run that they had in the Big 12. And it didn't really look that close for a lot of the season until Baylor did unfortunately get COVID, and then they looked vulnerable, which obviously anyone would after a situation like that. And so I really do think that kind of the downtime after losing in the semifinals of the Big 12 probably helped Baylor, but also in that case scenario, they're going to be playing a Villanova team who doesn't have Colin Gillespie, but is still proven that they are very dangerous. They scored 73 points and beat Winthrop by 10, which was one of the biggest upset picks throughout all of the brackets. They beat North Texas handily after North Texas beat Purdue by 9. And now they advanced to take on a very good Baylor team, but that's a Jay Wright company that you never want to see in the NCAA tournament. And I'm not saying that there's a difference between Villanova and Creighton in the 1 versus 5 matchups that you'll see between Gonzaga and Baylor. But I just think right now Creighton's playing better basketball than Villanova just because they're fully healthy and they're really coming into a great stride. They looked really good against Ohio, which was unfortunate for me because I had Ohio winning that one. But I just think that it's going to be Gonzaga versus Baylor in the NCAA championship game as of right now, as we sit here, unless something absolutely insane happens. And I just think that really summarizes the entirety of what this year has been. And I've said it from the get-go, and I'll continue to say it. We kind of started to lump Michigan into that category of being able to really compete with Gonzaga and Baylor, but they're now going into this without one of their best players in Isaiah Livers, who probably won't be back for the rest of the tournament. And then we saw craziness happen out of the Midwest region where we're going to see probably either an 8 or a 12 or an 11 or maybe even a 2 seed out of Houston advance to the Elite Eight or Final Four. So there's a lot of craziness that's still going to play out. You have Oral Roberts taking on Arkansas in the Sweet 16, and Oral Roberts is on an absolutely incredible run, beating Ohio State and then backing that up with a win over Florida. It's just going to be nuts. It's going to be a really fun Sweet 16, but I do still see Baylor being able to win, and that's just kind of the way I've seen it all year long as well. And I'm just I definitely don't agree with the takes of the Big Ten conference is bad. Like they've had a bad tournament. Like let's not get that twisted. They have had a bad tournament. They've had cases where I see where people are coming from of saying the Big Ten was overrated and all of these things. You look at the grand scheme of the year that this has been in college basketball, and then now you come into or just sports in general and the unpredictability of what's been happening, and now you take it into this tournament scenario where all of that boils down to one game and you have to be at your absolute best for one game. That's just too much to encapsulate what this year has been for all of these players, these coaches, the entirety of the program, of what they've had to go through to even be at this point of this season, to be in the NCAA tournament. I've heard it a lot of different times on a lot of different coverages of this will be the most deserving NCAA champion for basketball that we've probably ever had. And I agree with that because it's just been unprecedented times, going through crazy situations where you've had to get tested every single day. You have to go through all of these protocols. We don't even go to class regularly. It's just a completely different lifestyle than what the usual NCAA tournament would provide. And now that these teams have advanced past the first and second round, they get a week to kind of settle in, prepare, get ready for their Sweet 16 matchups. I just think you're going to see the best sort of performances from every team left. And when you break that down, it's going to be really fun to watch. You got a lot of high seeds in this left, and got a lot of Cinderella stories possibly advancing. And when you look at what the storylines of the actual tournament itself have been, the Big Ten has not played well. The Pac-12 has played phenomenally, and you have one seed from the Big Ten and the Big 12 advancing into the Sweet 16. That's just the fact of the matter. But when you break it down and look at the larger picture, that's not what the entirety of the basketball landscape was for how long? 3 months now. So that's just kind of my take.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I guess the one thing that's been interesting to me is you see the SEC fly under the radar here. Everyone's talking, the Pac-12 is underrated, and the Big 12 and Big 10 were overrated because that's what everyone was talking about. But the whole time, no one's talking about the SEC. Alabama's better than I really thought. And Arkansas, I picked Texas Tech in that game, and Texas Tech had a great chance of winning it with a layup that would have tied the game. But Arkansas was the better team in that game. And Arkansas is, to me, the main threat to Baylor in that region right now. And you see a team like Florida advance around. You see LSU advance around and push Michigan. So I think that the narrative of conferences being underrated, overrated, or just right is kind of silly to play over a thing as small a sample size as the tournament is. I think the way to do it is just talk about the rankings and compare it to strength of the schedule, and that's what we did all year. And I think it was pretty evident who the best conference was. But I'm happy to see. I mean, that's what makes Madness so special, is that anyone can win. It's not always like, if it's best 4 out of 7. You see the Big Ten ACC Challenge, for instance. I use this as a point of reference talking on Twitter. Is like, you can see who's the better conference by winning those, because then now you get a collective sample size of playing 2 power conferences against each other. And now you do the same thing with Big 12 SEC, and you saw who won, and those were the Big 12 and the Big 10. But I that's the thing that I love about Madness, is you can't have that predictability. And I don't think people should make these takeaways based off one game sample sizes, because that is what March Madness is known for. It's just exactly that. It's madness. It's stuff that you don't see happening. In what world do you see Oral Roberts beating Ohio State and then beating Florida and having a chance, at Arkansas? Like, they could be making an Elite 8 run. They're hot. They shoot the free throw at 83% clip as a team. They've got the best scorer in the nation. But no one's going to say, oh, the Oral Roberts is from their conference. That's the best one. But to me, that's the same justification as what people are doing. So I'm glad we agree on that take. But I got one question. Well, I think we're kind of heading to the wrap up. I've got a question for you. What has been the best game for you to watch, and then and the game that you most enjoyed, whether it was narrative or just best basketball?
It's a great question. I'm gonna have to look through some of these. There's just been so many. I really think, in terms of best basketball, I think you have to look at Arkansas. Texas Tech is up there for me. You have to also look at some games such as Rutgers and Houston was awesome to watch and really fun to watch. Syracuse, West Virginia, I think was the best game that I've watched so far in this tournament, now that I saw that one. I remember sitting down and just being like, all right, here we go. I have got West Virginia moving far in pretty much all of my brackets, but Syracuse, that zone in the NCAA tournament, and Syracuse looked so good and so fun. And that ended up being 75-72. The game ended on an accidental travel because the guy was expecting contact and it didn't come. So West Virginia turned it over and didn't get a chance to tie the game, and Syracuse was able to win. That game was so fun to watch and was exceptional basketball. That one really stands out. And then I think the best individual performance, though, was absolutely Loyola Chicago over Illinois. And just the way that they were able to systematically scheme to take away Kofi Coburn defensively was amazing, because they played that little pick play where they got a screen and a roll, and Coburn had to either commit to stopping the drive for a layup or taking away the big man. And there was a layup guaranteed either way whenever they wanted it, with that little spinorama pick and roll that just played absolutely to perfection. And that was beautiful to watch. The scheme worked perfectly, and defensively also they made Illinois just completely miserable. They didn't get any shot that they really wanted, and held, I would assume, it basically out of the game. And he's one of the best players in all of basketball. So I think the best game was Syracuse, West Virginia. Best individual performance was Loyola Chicago against Illinois.
I was hoping you'd go elsewhere, but excuse me. I was hoping you'd go elsewhere. That's exactly my picks. I love the Syracuse West Virginia game. There was ebbs and flows. There was some great shot making. You saw Buddy Buckets and McNeil trading threes. They both hit like 7 threes apiece, and probably there was 1 3 by Joe Girard that was probably from like 40 feet, and that's not even an exaggeration. Like he was like on the side of the court, like even with the like middle of the logo. So that was ridiculous. That was my favorite game. I loved that you saw some 2 old timer coaches battling it out too. To me, that it added to the narrative, especially with Huggins getting his 900th win the day prior. And yeah, my performance, I said it earlier, is my first round. I was most impressed by Loyola Chicago over Georgia Tech. And my second round, I was most impressed by Loyola Chicago over Illinois. And you talked about the peel cut action where Krutwig, they I guess it's like a scissor cut action where one player curls over the top and one cuts below. And if he pitches it back and then it's like a little mid-range jump shot because Kofi Coburn does a drop coverage. And that's all Illinois does. And I'm surprised fewer teams have tried to do that. But the reason it was successful is Cameron Krutwig is so rare. You rarely have a passer in a center in college that is your best passer. He was basically Nikola Jokic in this. They would cut off of him, and if they didn't get it, he'd back into the post, and he's got some array of footwork, and he'd turn over his right shoulder and shoot a little lefty baby hook. And that was incredible. And then defensively, they gapped up everything and said, hey, Trent Frazier, hey, DeMonte Williams, Jacob Grandison, anyone but Io and Kofi, we're going to let you score. They gapped up, they hedged all screens, and then whenever they would throw the slip to Kofi, they double and make him kick out. And Trent Frazier is a really good shooter. He shoots 36% from 3. He was coming on late in the year, and he went 1 of 10 in the game. DeMonte Williams had 2 points. Jacob Grandison had 3. So that was 7 points combined by 3 players that play huge minutes for Illinois. And Kofi and Io were doubled constantly. So beautiful preparation. Porter Moser, if he keeps his job, is going to keep Loyola Chicago relevant. But I have a theory that whatever big opening opens up, Indiana is a popular one, that Porter Moser is going to get paid. Like he's the next Brad Stevens, whether he goes to the NBA or he stays in college. I think he's better suited for college due to the pace of the game where he can control it. He's going to be a nice like $8 million plush salary. So I'm glad we agree on those. I can't wait for some more madness, and unfortunately we got school to do in the meantime, but I can't wait for madness this weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome to watch. We'll be back with you all later this week at some point to preview some of these Sweet 16 games. We got an amazing slate to get to. We'll offer up some analysis, some picks, some good stuff like that as we turn our focus now onto the Sweet 16 and the teams that remain throughout the craziness that was round 1 and 2. If you have any further questions on some of the things that we really harped on and think about some of these first round matchups, please feel free to hit us up. We'll be happy to talk about it with you. A lot of insane things went down last weekend in basketball. It's what you always want to see in March Madness. And so I think this year we just got the most of it. And I saw a stat that was the most ever upsets in a March Madness tournament ever. And so you're just looking at history. It's been a historic weekend, and it's been amazing to be able to have the opportunity to take in all of the action and watch it unfold and live those moments and whatnot. So it's what we all live for when the calendar turns to March. So happy it's back this year. Any final thoughts, Leaf, before we catch them later in the week?
I'm just happy we got March Madness back after a year. I almost forgot what it felt like, and it was the best thing ever all over again. So I hope everyone else felt the same way, and I know we did.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, take care, everyone. Stay safe in the meantime. We will catch you later in the week and get you ready for great matchups that lie ahead next weekend. Take care, everyone.
Have a good one.